The day had been ordinary, the kind of Tuesday that deserved to be forgotten immediately upon completion. Sarah Martinez had spent her morning in back-to-back Zoom calls, her lunch warming and cooling on her desk while she negotiated with a client who couldn't make up his mind, and her afternoon filing expense reports that made her contemplate the meaning of existence. She'd finally escaped the house at 4:47 p.m., needing to drive to the hardware store for supplies to fix her deck before the weekend. The garage door had stood open, that mechanical eye staring into the street, inviting the world to look in at her belongings. The autumn light was turning gold, the kind that made everything look like a painting even when life felt mundane. Sarah had been inside for exactly 6 minutes. She was in the kitchen, shoes off, refilling her water bottle, when the sound came, not a crash exactly, but a sound that didn't belong. A wet, crunching collision of metal and brick that seemed to vibrate through the entire house. The kind of sound that makes your animal brain scream danger. She ran. The kitchen door to the garage was only feet away, and she pushed through it, and what she saw in those first seconds would carve itself into her memory with terrible clarity. A silver Honda Civic, maybe 2015, was embedded partially into her garage's western wall. The driver's side headlight was shattered into a constellation of glass. The hood was crumpled like tissue paper. A child-sized dent in her brick, not even the brick itself, but the decades-old mortar between them, spiderwebbing outward. Her wheelbarrow, which she'd left near the garage interior, was twisted metal beneath the back bumper. And then, motion. The driver's side door flew open with the desperate violence of someone who needed to escape immediately. A teenager fell out, literally fell, stumbling over his own feet in his panic. Gangly, probably 17, wearing the kind of hoodie that cost more than his car insurance probably did. His eyes were wide, pupils blown with adrenaline, and his mouth was already opening in that reflexive stutter of denial. Oh God, I didn't. Sarah's mind hadn't caught up yet. It was still processing the physical fact of the crash, the violation of her space, her property crushed into the wall like it meant nothing. She stepped forward, and the teenager stepped back, his hand coming up in that universal gesture of please don't hit me. I'm calling the police, Sarah heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, belonging to someone else. The teenager's face went through 3 emotions in quick succession: panic, calculation, desperation. He was already backing away, toward the open garage door, toward the street beyond. Wait, just wait, okay? My mom, she'll pay for everything. Just, please don't. But he wasn't waiting. He was already moving, his long legs eating up the distance between him and escape. Sarah realized, with the clarity of someone watching a robbery happen in real time, that he was actually going to run. Hey! Stop! He didn't stop. He disappeared around the edge of the garage, and a moment later, Sarah heard footsteps hitting asphalt, getting fainter. By the time she ran to the driveway, he was already halfway down the block, moving in that desperate loping run of someone who'd made a catastrophic choice and was doubling down on it. Sarah stood in the fading light, barefoot, still holding her water bottle, watching a teenager run away from the wreckage he'd created. The absurdity of it struck her first, the sheer, audacious cowardice of hitting someone's house and just leaving. Not even trying. Not even pretending. But the absurdity curdled quickly into something else. Something hot and bright and focused. She went back inside, set down the water bottle, and found her phone. She'd installed the security system 3 months ago, after a series of package thefts on her street. 3 cameras, one on the front door, one on the mailbox, one inside the garage covering the entire space. She'd never had to review the footage before. Her hands were shaking as she pulled up the app. The garage camera had captured everything. The impact, frame by frame. The teenage driver stumbling out of the car. His face. His fear. His flight. Sarah watched it twice, then once more, making note of the timestamp, 4:53 p.m. 11 minutes ago. She didn't need to see his face to know who he was, the quality was clear enough, and besides, she recognized him. He was Jason Calloway, the 17-year-old who lived 3 streets over, the son of Karen Calloway, who'd made a point of introducing herself at a neighborhood association meeting last spring by monopolizing the entire conversation and making it very clear that her opinions on zoning laws superseded everyone else's. Sarah had disliked her immediately and thoroughly. The police took 23 minutes to arrive. Sarah stood in her garage, documenting everything on her phone, the point of impact, the crumpled wheelbarrow, the scrapes and dents and the actual hole, honest-to-God hole, in her wall. Her homeowner's insurance would cover some of it, probably. She'd have to talk to her agent. She'd have to get estimates from contractors. This would consume weeks of her life. The officer who showed up was a woman in her 50s named Reeves, with the kind of tired professionalism that came from 20 years of dealing with people at their worst. Pretty clear impact pattern, Officer Reeves said, standing back and assessing the damage with the clinical eye of someone who'd seen 1,000 of these situations. You get the driver? Sarah hesitated. A lie bloomed in her mind, fully formed. She could say she hadn't seen him. Could leave Jason Calloway out of the immediate police report, just mention the crash, the damage. Maybe Karen Calloway would do the right thing and come forward. Maybe there was still a universe where this worked out on its own. But Sarah had watched the teenager run. Had seen the moment he chose flight over responsibility. Had been abandoned in her own home by someone who lived close enough to probably see her garage from his second-floor bedroom. I did, Sarah said. Jason Calloway. Lives on Maple Street. He took off before I could get his information. Officer Reeves's expression didn't change, but something shifted. He fled the scene. He did. You want to press charges for that, or just file the insurance report? Sarah looked back at her garage wall, at the brick that had been there longer than she'd owned the house, and at the silver car that was currently embedded in it like a sculpture of consequence. I want to file the police report, she said. Let the system handle it. Officer Reeves nodded and made notes. She took photos, got Sarah's information, answered questions about whether anyone was injured. No one was, thank God, though the possible outcomes of a car hitting the garage while Sarah was standing there made her feel dizzy when she thought about it. The whole thing took 45 minutes. By the time Officer Reeves left, by the time Sarah had called her insurance company and started the claim process, by the time she'd moved her car to the driveway because the garage was now a crime scene, well, not a crime scene, but a scene of crime, an official record, something that existed now in the permanent architecture of her life, it was dark. She ordered takeout and sat in her living room with her laptop, obsessively refreshing the security camera footage, watching it over and over. The impact. The panic. The flight. Her phone rang at 8:47 p.m. The caller ID said, unknown number, and Sarah's stomach dropped before she even answered, because she already knew. Already knew what the next phase of this was going to be. Is this Sarah Martinez? A woman's voice, controlled but underneath it, a thread of something sharp. The voice of someone used to getting her way. It is, Sarah said carefully. This is Karen Calloway. I'm calling about the accident at your house. My son, Jason, was involved. I just want to be very clear that this was an accident, and I'm prepared to take full financial responsibility for any damages. There's absolutely no need to involve law enforcement or to make this more complicated than it needs to be. The way she said it, the tone, the assumption that Sarah would simply agree, that they could handle this like two reasonable adults, person to person, it triggered something in Sarah. He fled the scene, Sarah heard herself say. A pause on the other end. Then, he was scared. He's 17. He made a mistake, but he should not be saddled with a criminal record because of it. I'm sure you can understand that. Sarah understood that Karen Calloway believed her son's fear superseded Sarah's right to justice. Understood that in Karen's mind, the solution to her son hitting someone's house and running was to prevent consequences, not to accept them. I filed a police report, Sarah said. Another pause, longer this time. When Karen's voice returned, it had changed. The velvet had peeled back, revealing the steel underneath. I'm going to be honest with you, Sarah. I'm very well connected in this community. I know Judge Patterson personally. My brother-in-law is on the city council. If you push this, if you try to press charges, if you make my son's life more difficult because of one accident, and it was an accident, a teenage mistake, then there are going to be consequences. For you. For your business. I know who your clients are. I know who you work with. And I'm not beyond being a very difficult person when someone tries to ruin my family. Sarah felt her face go hot. The threat was dressed up in the language of warning, but there was no ambiguity underneath it. Karen was promising to use her connections to hurt Sarah if Sarah didn't roll over. Are you threatening me? Sarah asked. I'm explaining reality to you, Karen said. I'm trying to be nice about this. I'm offering to pay for everything. What I'm asking for in return is that you understand my son is not a criminal, he's not going to have his future destroyed by one mistake, and we're all going to move forward from this like civilized people. Sarah wanted to respond. Wanted to tell her exactly what she thought about her threats, her entitlement, her assumption that money and connections could erase consequences. Wanted to ask if Karen ever thought about how her son learned that running away from your problems was acceptable, that the solution to bad choices was not accountability but connections and intimidation. Instead, she said, I'll talk to my insurance company and my lawyer. This is out of my hands now. She hung up before Karen could respond. Her hands were shaking. The adrenaline coursed through her system, fight or flight, and she'd spent so long in the civilized world that the actual chemicals of rage felt foreign, overwhelming. She stood up and paced. Sat back down. Made herself a cup of tea she didn't drink. The security camera footage waited on her laptop, patient and damning. Sarah opened her video editing software. It took her an hour to splice together a 14-minute sequence that showed the crash, the driver's panic, his flight, and included the timestamp. She uploaded it to a private cloud account and made sure it was locked down. Backed it up to an external drive. Made a copy on a USB stick. If Karen thought she could intimidate Sarah into silence, she was about to learn a very important lesson about underestimating people. Sarah didn't sleep well that night. She dreamed about the impact, about what could have happened if she'd been standing in the garage, about the moment Jason Calloway decided that running was better than facing what he'd done. And underneath it all, running through her thoughts like dark water, was the certainty that this wasn't over. That Karen Calloway had just made a crucial mistake. She'd threatened someone who had evidence. She'd picked a fight with someone who had nothing left to lose. The insurance adjuster came on Thursday morning, and he confirmed what Sarah already knew, the damage to her garage would cost $8,400 to repair. The wheelbarrow was a total loss. The brick and mortar damage alone required a mason. The structural integrity of the wall needed assessment. The whole thing was a disaster that spiraled outward from a single 17-year-old's bad decision. Sarah provided the police report number. She did not provide the security footage. Not yet. The police called that afternoon. Officer Reeves updated her that Jason Calloway had been cited for leaving the scene of an accident. His parents had hired a lawyer. The case would proceed through the juvenile justice system, and Sarah would likely be contacted to give a statement if it went to trial. The tone of Officer Reeves's voice suggested she didn't think it would. That the usual pattern of these things was that the teenager's expensive lawyer would negotiate a plea deal, the case would be resolved quietly, and everyone would move on. That wasn't the usual pattern Sarah had in mind. She called her own lawyer on Friday morning. Michael Chen had handled her house purchase 5 years ago and was in the contact list marked legal. He met her at a coffee shop near downtown, a neutral space, and Sarah brought her laptop. Michael was in his 50s, the kind of methodical person who asked clarifying questions before giving opinions. He watched the security footage without expression, then watched it again, then asked to see it a third time. "You're asking whether you can use this footage against him," Michael said, not as a question. I'm asking what my options are, Sarah said carefully. Your options in the criminal case. You cooperate with the police, you give them any evidence they request, you testify if called. Your options for civil court. You sue him for damages. The insurance company might cover some of it, but you could pursue the rest. Your options for other things. That gets more complex. What do you mean, other things? Michael set down his coffee. Sarah, I want to be clear about what I'm and am not willing to advise you on. I will absolutely help you pursue legitimate legal remedies. I will help you sue. I will help you testify. But if you're asking me whether you can use this footage to threaten him, to intimidate his family, to damage his reputation online, that's where I have to pump the brakes. That's where things get legally murky and ethically questionable. Sarah felt something deflate inside her. She'd been operating on a fantasy, she realized. A fantasy where she could deploy the footage like a weapon, where she could make Karen Calloway understand what consequences actually felt like. His mother threatened me, Sarah said. She said she'd use her connections to hurt my business. She made it very clear that if I pursued this, there would be retaliation. Michael's expression shifted. He leaned forward. Tell me exactly what she said. Sarah did. Word for word, as much as she could remember. Michael made notes, asked clarifying questions about the tone, the intent, whether there were witnesses. That's actually useful, Michael said when she finished. That's potentially extortion, or at least improper influence. That's something we can use. Did you record the call? No. Document everything from this point forward. If she contacts you again, record it. Keep notes on dates and times. If anyone else contacts you on her behalf, same thing. That's your leverage. Not the footage, that's evidence in a criminal matter, and you're not a prosecutor. But her threat? That's something you can use to protect yourself. They talked through the details. Michael offered to write a cease and desist letter to Karen Calloway, demanding that she not contact Sarah, not threaten her, not attempt to influence the legal case or intimidate her. The letter would be official, on lawyer letterhead, and it would make clear that any further attempts at intimidation would result in legal action. That's the right move, Michael said. That's how we handle this. That's how we stay on the right side of everything while making sure she understands she can't bully you. Sarah agreed. She paid for the letter, left the coffee shop, and spent the weekend trying to let the matter rest. It didn't rest. It metastasized. On Monday afternoon, she got a call from David Henricks, her largest client, the reason her business was viable at all. He was a regional marketing director for a chain of medical facilities, and he'd been working with Sarah for 3 years on their branding and advertising campaigns. The relationship was worth roughly $40,000 a year in contract work. Hey, I wanted to give you a heads up, David said, and there was something careful in his voice. I had Karen Calloway contact me this morning. She said she was a concerned member of the community and wanted to warn me that you'd become difficult to work with, that you were embroiled in some kind of legal dispute, and that it might not be wise to continue our business relationship. The bottom of Sarah's stomach fell out. This was the threat made manifest. This was Karen following through on her promise to be a very difficult person. What did you say? Sarah asked. I told her to pound sand, obviously, David said, and Sarah felt a surge of relief so strong it almost made her dizzy. I know you. You're professional. You're good at what you do. But I wanted you to know it happened, because it seems like a weird thing to do, and I thought maybe you should be aware that someone's trying to meddle in your business relationships. Sarah thanked him profusely and spent another hour documenting the conversation. She called Michael, who added it to a growing file of Karen Calloway's campaign of intimidation. By Friday of that week, it had happened to 2 more of her clients. Both of them also reported Karen's calls. Neither of them had pulled their contracts. Both of them wanted to know what was going on. Sarah had to have uncomfortable conversations explaining that she'd been in an accident, the other driver had fled the scene and was facing charges, and his mother was apparently trying to punish her for not covering it up. The humiliation was almost worse than the threat. The cease and desist letter had been sent on Wednesday. Karen Calloway apparently had received it, because the calls to Sarah's clients stopped. But the silence that followed was somehow worse than the active harassment. It was the silence of someone regrouping, of someone who'd been warned once and was simply moving to a different strategy. Sarah was at her home office on Sunday evening, working on invoices, when she got a message through her website. The contact form she'd set up for potential clients, the one that fed into her professional email. The message was from an account called concerned_parent 2024. I have knowledge of improper conduct that you engaged in during a recent accident in our neighborhood. I'm concerned about your character and integrity. I'm gathering evidence and may need to go to local news outlets to report this. I would encourage you to accept responsibility for your actions and make this right. She read it 3 times, each time her anger growing. Improper conduct. Sarah had been the one hit. Sarah had been the one threatened. And now Karen was playing the victim, crafting a narrative where Sarah was the unreasonable one, the difficult one, the one who'd escalated. Sarah forwarded the message to Michael with a note, new threat. Different tactic. Wants me to think she's gathering evidence against me. Michael called her back within 20 minutes. This is good, actually. This is a pattern. This is textbook harassment and intimidation. We're building a case here. I'm going to escalate this. I'm going to file a police report for harassment and send another letter, this one much more aggressive. We're going to make it clear that if this continues, we're filing for an order of protection and pursuing criminal charges for stalking and harassment. For the first time since the crash, Sarah felt like she had the upper hand. The letter went out on Monday. Aggressive, legal, unambiguous. It referenced the cease and desist, the calls to her clients, the email through her website. It stated clearly that any further contact, direct or indirect, would result in criminal charges for harassment and stalking. Sarah heard nothing for 5 days. On Sunday, she was in her backyard, working on the deck repairs she'd originally planned to do before the crash interrupted her life, when Karen's car pulled into her driveway. Not Karen's car, Jason's silver Honda. The one that had been fixed, apparently. The one that now sat in her driveway as if it had never crashed into her wall. Sarah set down her drill and walked around to the front of the house. Jason sat in the driver's seat, engine off, not moving. He looked exactly as panicked as he had in the security footage, except this time the panic was more focused, more intentional. Sarah waited. After a long moment, Jason got out of the car. He was taller than she'd realized, and younger than 17 somehow, maybe a late bloomer, probably a kid who'd been sheltered his whole life by a mother who protected him from all consequences. My mom said I had to come apologize, he said, and it came out not like an apology but like an order he was following. I'm sorry about your garage. I'm sorry I left. I shouldn't have done that. He said it all in one rush, like he'd been given a script and was executing it. That's nice, Sarah said, her voice level. But you're trespassing on my property right now. You and your mother need to stop contacting me. My lawyer has made that very clear. You need to leave. Jason's face went red. He looked back at the car, then at Sarah, and she realized with a jolt that he wanted to say something else. Wanted to break script. My mom, she said you were making this into a bigger deal than it is. She said you were trying to ruin my life. She said you'd done something to. Your mother was wrong about a lot of things, Sarah said. But that's not your problem. Your problem is that you hit my house and you ran. That's what happened. That's what the evidence shows. That's what's going to happen in court. And coming to my house, especially after your mother threatened me multiple times, is something I'm going to report to the police as harassment. Jason blinked. She could see the moment it registered that his mother's threats and his mother's version of events might not actually be how the rest of the world saw things. "Just go," Sarah said. "Before I call 911. He went. The silver Honda backed out of her driveway and pulled away, and Sarah stood in her front yard, heart pounding, anger hot in her chest. She called the police as soon as Jason was gone. Officer Reeves came back out, took another report, documented that Jason had shown up at Sarah's property in apparent violation of the cease and desist letter she'd filed. Officer Reeves had the tone of someone who was starting to lose patience with the whole Calloway family. "I'm going to suggest that you consider filing for a formal order of protection," Officer Reeves said. "Get it in writing. Make it official. That way, if she violates it, it's a hard charge." Sarah did that the following week. Went to court, presented the evidence of the harassment, the threats, the attempts to meddle in her business relationships. The judge granted the order. Karen Calloway was legally forbidden from contacting Sarah, from attempting to influence her business relationships, from sending anyone on her behalf to contact Sarah. It was official now. It was law. But Michael warned her something before she left the courthouse. "She's going to escalate," he said. "When cornered, people like this tend to escalate. You want to be prepared for that. You want to make sure you're documenting everything, that you're not going anywhere alone, that you have security cameras running and your phone on recording. I'm not trying to scare you, but I am trying to make sure you're taking this seriously." Sarah was taking it seriously. Too seriously, maybe. She found herself checking the security cameras obsessively, reviewing footage, looking for signs that Karen was watching, waiting, planning. The restraining order had been issued on a Thursday. By Monday of the following week, Sarah got a call from her home insurance company. "We've had a claim filed against your homeowner's policy," the agent said, her voice professionally neutral. "A claim for damage to a vehicle that struck your property. The claimant is Jason Calloway, represented by his attorney. They're claiming that you have failed to maintain your property, that your driveway was in an unsafe condition, that this contributed to the accident. They're seeking compensation for the repair costs to the vehicle." Sarah felt something crystallize inside her. Karen wasn't going to let this go. Karen was going to spend money, leverage lawyers, do whatever it took to make Sarah's life difficult. "How is that possible?" Sarah asked. "He hit my garage." "I know. The claim is frivolous, and we'll defend it. But they're claiming that the damage to the vehicle was caused by your negligent property maintenance, not by their son's negligent driving. They're saying he swerved to avoid an obstruction in your driveway and lost control. Of course, the police report clearly states he struck your building, but these things can get messy. You're going to want your own attorney on this." Sarah called Michael immediately. He was angry, genuinely angry, the first time she'd seen him drop his professional composure. "That's a bad faith claim," he said. "That's harassment using the legal system as a weapon. That's something we can report to the Bar Association. We can add this to the pattern. We're way past accident territory now. We're in retaliation territory." He filed a motion to dismiss the frivolous claim. But while that was being processed, while the legal system slowly ground its gears, Sarah sat in her home and waited for the next escalation. And it came, just not from Karen. The email arrived in Sarah's inbox on a Tuesday afternoon, casual and bureaucratic, as if it were announcing a parking permit renewal rather than the collapse of everything she'd built her case upon. State vs. Jason Calloway, Case No, redacted. Dear Ms. Martinez. This office has elected to decline prosecution in the above-referenced matter. After careful review, we have determined that insufficient evidence exists to support a filing of charges against the minor defendant. Your cooperation in this matter is appreciated. Sarah read it 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. She called Officer Reeves immediately. "What happened?" "There's clear evidence. There's video. He fled the scene." "I know," Officer Reeves said, and she sounded tired. Defeated. I don't know what happened up the chain. The DA's office just declined. Said they didn't think a juvenile case with property damage and a cited misdemeanor was worth the prosecutorial resources. Said he'd learn his lesson from the insurance claim and the family's cooperation. His family hired lawyers, Sarah said. His family threatened me. This isn't cooperation. I know, Officer Reeves said again. I'm sorry. This is above my pay grade, and honestly, it sounds like someone upstream made a call based on something other than the merits. But I can't prove that, and I can't do anything about it. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her. The criminal case was dead. The leverage she'd built through the evidence, through documenting everything, through following every protocol correctly, it was all suddenly worthless. She called Michael. Civil case is still live, Michael said, trying to reframe it, trying to find the silver lining. We can still sue Jason for damages. We can recover the costs through his family. His mother has money, Sarah said. His mother has lawyers. His mother apparently has enough connections to make a prosecutor decline charges when there's clear evidence of a crime. Michael was quiet for a long moment. I think, he said carefully, that you need to consider whether you want to continue down this path. Because what you're describing, what you think is happening, that's a rabbit hole that gets darker the further you go down it. Sarah understood what he was saying. She understood that he was suggesting she cut her losses, accept the insurance settlement, repair her garage, and move on with her life. She understood that this was the reasonable advice of a lawyer who'd seen too many cases of people destroying themselves chasing revenge. She also understood that she wasn't going to take it. Instead, she did something that Michael had specifically advised against. She posted the security footage on a private Facebook group called Suburban Safety Awareness. The group had 12,000 members, all local residents concerned about crime and property damage in their area. She included the footage and a caption. Teenager hits my house while I'm home. Flees the scene. His mother then threatens me with her connections if I don't cover it up. Afterward, she tries to turn it around and claim I damaged their car. This is what entitlement looks like. She hit post at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. By 3:15 p.m., there were 47 comments. By 4 p.m., there were 180. By evening, the post had been shared to 6 other community groups. By the next morning, it had been shared to 47 different local Facebook pages. By Friday, Google had indexed it. The post was no longer on just a private group. It was searchable. It was discoverable. It was effectively permanent. Sarah watched the engagement with a feeling that was not quite satisfaction but was absolutely intention. She was taking control of the narrative. She was making sure that this wasn't just a story between her and Karen and a teenager who'd made a bad choice. She was making sure that her entire community knew what had happened. Michael's email arrived that afternoon. Subject line, we need to talk. Immediately. You published the footage without consulting your attorney, he said when she called him back. You posted it to social media. You've now made it public evidence that could be subject to subpoena by either party, and more importantly, you've potentially created liability for yourself. If this is used in any way to damage the Calloway family's reputation, they could sue you for defamation. They could argue that you were encouraging harassment. They could. I didn't defame anyone, Sarah said. Everything I posted is true. The footage is real. The threat she made is real. Defamation isn't just about truth, Michael said. It's about intent and impact. If you published this with the intent to harm them, if you encouraged other people to act against them, that's different from just telling the truth. And more importantly, you've now placed yourself in a position where they're going to respond, and when they respond, it's not going to be civilized. He was right. Sarah knew he was right. But she couldn't stop watching the engagement, the shares, the comments from other people who'd had similar experiences, who understood what it felt like to be threatened by someone with money and connections. The response came on Saturday morning, in the form of a cease and desist letter from Karen's attorney, a man named Richard Sterling who apparently specialized in protecting people like Karen from the consequences of their behavior. You have unlawfully published defamatory content regarding my clients, including recordings captured on private property without consent. This publication has caused real and demonstrable harm to their reputation and has potentially exposed them to harassment. My clients are entitled to compensation for this harm, and we are prepared to file suit if the content is not removed immediately and a public retraction is not issued. Sarah forwarded it to Michael without comment. Don't issue a retraction, Michael said immediately. Don't remove anything. Because if you do, you're admitting liability. What we're going to do instead is sit tight. They're not going to sue you, because if they do, we're going to drag the entire history of this case into discovery. We're going to get the prosecutor's file. We're going to depose Karen. We're going to make their lives so legally complicated that they're going to regret ever threatening you in the first place. But Sarah knew Michael didn't believe that. She could hear the doubt underneath his confidence. She could hear the experienced lawyer who understood that sometimes the system didn't work, that sometimes money and connections did trump evidence and truth. By Monday, 3 more community groups had been contacted by Richard Sterling's office, demanding that the footage be taken down. The groups complied. But by then, the damage had been done. The footage was cached in a dozen different places. Screenshots existed. The story existed. And then, on Tuesday, Karen Calloway went on the local news. Sarah was at work, on a client call, when Michael texted her a link, turn on Channel 7 News. Now. The interview had apparently happened that morning. Karen sat across from the anchor with the expression of a woman who'd carefully prepared to look sympathetic, mascara that might have been from crying, a rehearsed story about how her family had been victimized by a vindictive neighbor, how her son had made a simple mistake and was now being hunted across social media by someone who wanted to ruin his future, how she tried to resolve things peacefully and had been met with harassment and intimidation. I have screenshots of her threatening to ruin his life, Karen said, and she held up her phone to the camera. The texts were carefully cropped. Sarah could see at a glance that context was missing, that the messages were edited, that they showed only Karen's version of events. We just wanted this to go away, Karen said, and there was genuine sadness in her voice, perfectly executed. We offered to pay for everything. But she became obsessed. She made this into a public crusade. She published video of my teenage son without his consent and encouraged people to target him. That's not justice. That's harassment. That's a mother trying to protect her child from someone who's using the legal system as a weapon of revenge. Sarah sat in her client meeting, feeling the room shift. Her client, Maria, a nice woman who owned a small spa, was clearly watching the interview on her phone under the table. When their meeting ended 20 minutes later, she texted Sarah, "My board is concerned about the allegations. We need to pause our contract while this resolves." 3 more clients called that afternoon. All with the same concern. All with the same request to pause, to pause, to pause. Michael was furious when Sarah told him. That's defamation. She's made false statements about you on public television. She's misrepresented the texts. She's lying about the situation. We have grounds to sue her now. But they both knew it didn't matter. By the time the lawsuit was resolved, by the time they proved that Karen was lying, Sarah's business would be destroyed. The rumor would have already done its damage. The narrative would have already been written by someone with better PR skills. Sarah sat in her home office that evening, watching her last remaining contract disappear as a client she'd worked with for 2 years sent an email saying they needed to distance themselves from controversy. She pulled up the footage again. Watched it for the 100th time. The moment of impact. The teenager's panic. The moment he ran. Everything was true. Every fact was accurate. But the story had been rewritten by someone with better resources, and the truth didn't matter anymore. She was thinking about this, about the unfairness of it, the absolute injustice of someone's money and media skills overcoming evidence and documentation, when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Is this Sarah Martinez? A man's voice, calm and official. It is. This is Detective Garrett Price with the Criminal Investigations Division. We've received a complaint that's been filed against you regarding the publication of video content that may have violated privacy laws. We're going to need you to come in for an interview. Sarah felt her world tip sideways. What complaint? A complaint regarding the privacy rights of a minor who appears in the video you published without consent, Detective Price said. I'm going to need you to come down to the station this Friday at 2 p.m. You're welcome to have your attorney present. Michael sat next to Sarah in the interview room, a space that smelled like bad coffee and fluorescent desperation. Detective Price had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen enough of human nature to be perpetually unimpressed by it. He had a file in front of him, manila and official, and he didn't look happy. Walk me through why you posted a video of a minor online without parental consent, Detective Price said, not as a question but as an accusation wearing a question's disguise. It was evidence of a crime, Sarah said. Evidence of a hit-and-run accident. The evidence was submitted to law enforcement, Detective Price said. That's how you submit evidence. You don't post it on Facebook. You don't share it in community groups. You don't make it viral. The case was dropped, Sarah said. The prosecutor declined to press charges despite the evidence being clear. Detective Price leaned back in his chair. And so you took it upon yourself to become judge, jury, and prosecutor? You decided that since the criminal justice system didn't do what you wanted, you'd publish the video and let the court of public opinion handle it. Michael put his hand on Sarah's arm, a warning. But Sarah was already engaged, already past the point of caution. Yes, she said. Because the system failed. Because his mother threatened me and then got the case dropped. Because nobody was going to hold that kid accountable unless I made sure the truth was public. Detective Price made a note. Did you have permission from the minor to publish his image? No. Did you have permission from his parents? No. Are you aware that there are laws against publishing the image of a minor without parental consent? Michael leaned forward. Detective, I think we need to clarify something. My client published this in response to a crime against her property. The video shows a criminal act, hit and run, property damage. That's not hers to prosecute, Detective Price said, not even looking at Michael. That's the prosecutor's decision. That's law enforcement's decision. She's a citizen. She doesn't get to make a video of a minor committing a crime and broadcast it to the world because she's upset about the outcome. His mother threatened her repeatedly, Michael said. She's facing charges of harassment, of defamation, of slander based on false statements the mother made on television. This is clearly retaliation for. I'm aware of that, Detective Price said. But two wrongs don't make a right. And publishing a video of a minor on social media is its own wrong, regardless of what motivated it. The interview lasted another 45 minutes. Detective Price went through the timeline, the post, the shares, the engagement. He was methodical and professional and absolutely immune to the unfairness of the situation. By the end, he had everything he needed to move forward with a complaint to the prosecutor's office. Walking out to the parking lot, Sarah felt like she'd been upended. She'd been the victim. She'd documented everything properly. She'd followed procedures. And somehow, she was the one being investigated. This is going to get worse before it gets better, Michael said as they reached Sarah's car. They're going to file charges for violating privacy laws, potentially invasion of privacy statutes. It depends on the state, but you could be looking at misdemeanor charges at least. We can fight it, but we're going to need to work strategically. Sarah called David Henricks that evening, the client who'd stood by her. I think I need to let you go, she said without preamble. I'm being investigated by the police. You need to protect yourself and your company. I don't want any association with me to hurt you. Sarah, no, David said. You didn't do anything wrong. I don't care anymore, Sarah said. And it was true. She didn't care about the legal arguments or the moral high ground or whether she was technically right. She cared about the fact that Karen Calloway had weaponized the system and had won. I'm shutting down my business. I can't put my clients at risk. She spent the weekend closing out her company. Notified her remaining clients. Offered refunds. Filed the paperwork to dissolve her LLC. It took 6 hours of bureaucratic machinery, and when it was done, the business that had taken her 7 years to build was gone. On Monday, Detective Price's department formally filed a complaint with the prosecutor's office. Charges of violating state privacy laws by publishing video of a minor without consent. A misdemeanor, but the kind of misdemeanor that followed you, that showed up on background checks, that made future employment in her field impossible. Sarah spent the next week in a fog of legal meetings with Michael, of discussing strategy and timeline and potential outcomes. Michael recommended they focus on the consent angle, that there was an implied consent when someone committed a crime on your property, that the newsworthiness of the crime overrode privacy concerns, that the video was relevant and necessary to understanding the crime. It's a reasonable argument, Michael said. But it's not a slam dunk. The law on this is still evolving. And there's one more problem. What? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she had capacity for one more problem. Karen Calloway is now being characterized as the victim of harassment and invasion of privacy. That narrative, the one she's controlled, the one she's broadcast, is becoming the official narrative. People believe her. The news is treating her like she's a vulnerable woman protecting her child. That changes the jury pool. That changes how this looks to a judge. Sarah realized then that she'd lost. Not in any legal sense, but in the way that mattered. She'd been outsmarted by someone with better resources and a clearer understanding of how perception worked. Karen had turned Sarah's evidence against her, had weaponized Sarah's own righteous anger into a liability. The summons came on Thursday. Sarah was being charged with violating state privacy laws, and her trial was scheduled to begin in 8 weeks. She sat in her living room that evening, alone, and watched the news interview with Karen Calloway play again on her laptop. Watched her talk about how frightened her son was, how traumatized the family had been, how violated they felt by Sarah's actions. Every word was a lie. Every tear was calculated. And none of it mattered, because Karen had understood something that Sarah hadn't. In a battle between truth and narrative control, narrative almost always wins. The next morning, Sarah did something she'd never imagined doing. She called Karen Calloway's house directly. A woman answered, probably Karen, probably thinking it was a neighbor or a friend, and when Sarah asked for her, there was a pause, then Karen's voice on the phone, cool and prepared, like she'd been expecting this call. Before you say anything, Karen said, I want you to know that this call is being recorded, and anything you say will be documented. I'm dropping the civil case, Sarah said. I'm not going to pursue damages. I'm going to accept that Jason hit my house and I'm going to move on with my life. There was a pause. Then Karen said, that's very wise of you. I want you to talk to the prosecutor, Sarah said. I want you to tell them that I published the video without understanding the legal implications, that I was responding emotionally rather than rationally, and that you and your son want to drop the investigation. Why would I do that? Karen asked, and there was genuine amusement in her voice now. The amusement of someone who'd already won and didn't need anything else. Because I could keep going, Sarah said. I could keep posting. I could keep talking about the threats you made, the media campaign you ran, the way you tried to ruin my business. I could spend the next 10 years turning myself into a cautionary tale about corporate intimidation and family harassment. Or you could call the prosecutor and make a call asking them to consider showing mercy to someone who was emotionally reacting to a traumatic situation. Karen was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to let you off the hook. I'm asking you to end this, Sarah said. Because the alternative is me spending everything I have left fighting you, and even if I lose, even if I go to jail, even if I'm destroyed, I can still keep fighting. I can still keep the story alive. I can still make sure that everyone in this community knows what you did. And I don't think you want that. Another pause. Sarah could hear Karen breathing. I'll make a call, Karen said finally. To the prosecutor. I'll tell them that this was all a misunderstanding, that my son and I want to move forward, that I don't feel comfortable pressing the privacy complaint. But this is the end. You stop talking about us. You stop posting. You stop any contact whatsoever. You disappear from my family's life. Done, Sarah said. She hung up. The prosecutor's office dropped the charges 3 days later. No explanation, just a formal notice that the complaint had been withdrawn and the case was closed. Sarah's record remained clean. Her arrest, her investigation, her legal nightmare, it all evaporated as if it had never happened. 6 months later, Sarah sat in a coffee shop in a different neighborhood, across town, far enough away that she wouldn't run into anyone from her old life. She was working now, but not for herself. Not anymore. She was a freelance consultant for a marketing agency, the kind of job that was fine but unremarkable, the kind of work that paid the bills without demanding her soul. The money was substantially less. The stability was virtually non-existent. But she was alive, which was more than she'd thought would be possible in the darkest moments of the trial she didn't have to have. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. She almost didn't click it, but something made her. Suburban teen arrested in connection with hit and run, police say additional charges pending. She clicked. Jason Calloway had been arrested the previous evening for hitting a parked car in a mall parking lot and fleeing the scene. Not a homeowner's garage this time, a woman's vehicle. The woman had been present and had gotten a clear look at the driver. She'd filmed him as well. The article went on to state that this was Jason's second hit-and-run incident in 8 months, and that police were investigating whether he might be involved in additional property damage incidents in the surrounding area. The tone of the article was notably different from the sympathetic framing that had surrounded the first incident. This time, Jason Calloway was a suspected serial hit-and-run offender. Sarah read the article twice, then 3 times, not because she was surprised but because she was noticing something specific. The second victim, the woman at the mall, had apparently been in the parking lot with the vehicle. Had filmed Jason fleeing. Had provided police with clear evidence. And apparently, the prosecutor's office had been less sympathetic the second time around. Jason Calloway ended up taking a deal. 2 counts of leaving the scene of an accident. A fine. Community service. A mark on his record that would affect his job prospects for the next several years. It wasn't the catastrophic legal consequences that might have happened if Sarah had pushed it all the way through. But it was something. It was proof that Sarah hadn't imagined the pattern, hadn't been wrong about what Jason was capable of when there were no actual consequences. A week after that, Karen Calloway's name appeared in the local paper again. Not the news section this time, but the local business section. An article about her nonprofit work, about her board positions, about what she'd accomplished in the community. Except now, when you Googled her name, the first result was the Facebook post that had been shared across 47 community groups. The video. The story. The entire documentation of who she was. Sarah had kept the post up, technically, though it had been archived, shared so many times that it existed in a permanent state of circulation. It was no longer actively promoted by Sarah or anyone else, but it was there. It was searchable. And it would be there, in Google's cache, probably forever. She wondered if Karen thought about that. If she understood that she'd won the battle by crushing Sarah's business and forcing her withdrawal, but had lost the war. That her son's behavior had eventually caught up with him, and her own actions had been immortalized in the kind of way that no PR campaign could undo. Sarah's phone rang. It was David Henricks, the client who'd stood by her before she pushed him away. "I heard about Jason Calloway," David said without preamble. "Saw the news. Realized that maybe I owed you an apology for that moment when I was scared to keep working with you." "You don't owe me anything," Sarah said. "You did what you had to do. Still, I wanted to check on you. See how you're doing." They talked for an hour. David offered her work. Better paying work, actually. Contract work for his medical facility's new branding campaign. The kind of work Sarah used to do, with the kind of compensation she used to make. "I can't rebuild everything," Sarah said. "I'm not starting a business again. I can't take that risk." "This isn't a risk," David said. "It's just work. You do the work, I pay you, everybody's happy. You don't have to make it bigger than that." Sarah took the contract. It felt strange, working independently again, but without the weight of a business, without the exposure of her name on everything. Just the work itself. Just the skill. Over the next 3 months, other clients started coming back. Not all of them. Not the ones who'd abandoned her out of fear. But enough. People who understood that Sarah had been right, had been wronged, and had learned a hard lesson about how the world actually worked. By month 9, Sarah had rebuilt enough of her client base to think about maybe, possibly, starting something small again. Not a big operation. Not the growth-focused business she'd had before. Just enough to have some autonomy, some control over her time and her energy. She was sitting in the same coffee shop, 3 weeks past the 1-year anniversary of the crash, when Michael called. "I wanted to give you a heads up," Michael said. "The Callaways are being sued. It's a class action, actually. There are at least 3 other people filing suit against Karen Calloway for harassment and intimidation related to business matters. One of them did background research and discovered that she's apparently done this before, to other people in other neighborhoods. Same pattern, threat, intimidation, escalation. Is that something I should join?" Sarah asked. "That's something I think you should consider," Michael said. "Because here's the thing, sometimes the system does work. It just works slowly. It takes time, and it takes persistence, and it takes people who are willing to document everything and follow the legal process even when it's painful. The other plaintiffs are going to win their cases. The precedent is going to be set. And if you join now, you're going to recover damages. You're going to recover your legal fees. You're going to recover some of what you lost." Sarah thought about the year she'd lost. The business she'd given up. The clients who'd abandoned her. The career trajectory that had been derailed. She thought about whether money would actually repair any of that. "Let me think about it," she said. But in the quiet of her apartment that evening, as she reviewed her finances and realized that she'd slowly, laboriously, expensively rebuilt a life that might never be quite the same as the one she'd had before the crash, she realized something else. Karen Calloway had won the immediate battle. She'd made Sarah's life difficult and had forced her into a corner and had publicly humiliated her and had made her withdraw. But what Karen hadn't understood was that Sarah had learned something important in the process. She had learned that she could document things. That she could gather evidence methodically. That she could navigate legal systems even when they seemed stacked against her. That she could come back from being destroyed. Karen had learned nothing except that intimidation could work. And eventually, that kind of thinking caught up with people. Sarah called Michael back the next morning and told him she wanted to join the lawsuit. The settlement came through 14 months after Sarah filed suit as part of the class action. Karen Calloway's liability insurance covered most of it, but the actual settlement reflected not just the financial loss but the systemic harassment, the intimidation, the calculated campaign to destroy Sarah's business and reputation. Sarah received $127,000. It wasn't enough to rebuild everything she'd lost. But it was enough to matter. It was enough to prove that she'd been right, that the courts had eventually understood what happened, that the truth did eventually win, even if it took longer than seemed reasonable. Jason Calloway ended up with a juvenile record and a strong suggestion from his probation officer to take a driving course and anger management classes. He didn't get destroyed. He didn't go to jail. But he also didn't grow up to be someone who thought he could run away from his problems without consequences. Karen Calloway lost the lawsuit. She had to pay damages. Her reputation in the community shifted from someone who'd been protective of her son to someone who'd been caught harassing her neighbor. The narrative she'd so carefully controlled was rewritten by public record and legal discovery. And on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 years and 3 months after Jason Calloway's car had impacted Sarah's garage wall, Sarah sat at her laptop and opened a new business license application. This time, it was for a small marketing consultancy. No office. Just Sarah, her skills, and the clients who'd learned they could trust her. She was careful about which clients she took. She was careful about which projects she pursued. She was careful, in every way, about protecting herself. But she was also, for the first time in 2 years, something that felt like hopeful. She thought about the moment Jason had fled the scene of the accident. About the moment Karen had threatened her. About the moment Sarah had decided to fight rather than accept. None of it had been easy. All of it had been costly. But Sarah had understood something that Karen never quite grasped: the person who is willing to document everything, to follow the proper channels, to be patient with the legal system even when it feels like the system is against her, that person eventually wins. Not quickly. Not always in the ways you expect. But eventually. The impact had been an accident. Everything that came after was a choice. And Sarah had chosen to not let the choice be made for her by someone with better connections.